Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to be looking way past that cozy familiar myth we all know, the lone genius inventor tinkering away in a dusty workshop. Instead, we're going to uncover the incredibly aggressive, highly calculated corporate playbook that General Electric actually used to conquer the nascent electrical industry. We're diving deep into the literal mechanisms of power that transformed GE from a scrappy late 19th century startup into an absolute 20th century behemoth.
So it's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? How exactly do you conquer an entire industry from scratch? Because as you'll see, GE's rise absolutely wasn't just about making a better light bulb or a more efficient dynamo. It was about mastering the sheer art of market control. It was about building an engine of corporate power that was so comprehensive, so massive, that it practically became the economy around it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To understand how they pulled this off, we're going to unpack four key strategic pillars: the birth of a giant, weaponized research and development, collusion and market control, and financing the consumer market, before we bring it all together to look at the ultimate blueprint of dominance.
All right, pillar number one, the birth of a giant. Let's head back to 1892. To really grasp the scale of this, you have to picture the sheer chaos of the late 19th century electrical market. It was a total Wild West. Volatile, fiercely competitive, and completely bogged down by crippling patent wars. So in 1892, financier J.P. Morgan orchestrated this brilliant strategic merger as the ultimate solution to the deadlock. On one side, you had Edison General Electric with $15 million in capital, heavily invested in direct current and incandescent lamps. On the other side, Thomson Houston, with about $10.4 million in capital, completely dominating alternating current and arc lighting. Now, this wasn't just about combining two huge balance sheets. It was a highly deliberate strategy to combine their competing patents. You see, without merging, entering the new AC technology field without infringing on competitors' patents would have been virtually impossible for the Edison camp. Together, they literally created an inescapable technological foundation.
And honestly, the greatest irony here, Thomas Edison himself vehemently opposed the merger. He was terrified of eliminating competition and losing his personal legacy. And, well, he kinda did. The business mastermind from Thomson Houston, Charles A. Coffin, stepped in as the first CEO. Coffin took this newly combined patent fortress and institutionalized a vertically integrated empire, bringing strict, ruthless managerial discipline to raw invention.
Which brings us to pillar number two, weaponized research and development.
We usually assume that corporate R&D is all about noble scientific discovery, right? Just pushing the boundaries of human knowledge for the greater good. Well, GE's early strategy totally challenges that assumption. When the brilliant electrical engineer Charles Steinmetz pitched the first U.S. industrial research lab to GE executives in 1900, pure science was definitely not his main selling point. He explicitly argued, "It appears to me that our company would have in such work a very great advantage over any other concern." The goal was, straight up, stymieing the competition. He and other executives knew that if someone else got ahead in development, GE would be forced to spend massive sums buying up their patents later. So the lab was fundamentally designed to be both a defensive shield and an offensive weapon.
But the supreme irony of this whole strategy actually comes down to Steinmetz himself. Get this, Charles Steinmetz was a staunch socialist who literally had to flee Germany for his radical politics. Yet here he is becoming the primary architect of a corporate monopoly. To him, ruthless market competition was inherently destructive. He genuinely believed that organizing massive industrial labs to centralize and control innovation was just the rational, logical next step for industrial society.
And wow, did this strategy pay off at breakneck speed. Founded in a literal carriage barn in 1900, this lab just started churning out critical patents. By 1908, they had developed the ductile tungsten light bulb filament, which was vastly superior to Edison's old carbon-based bulb. But this wasn't just some clever new invention. It functioned as a legal weapon that GE used to build an impenetrable patent fortress around their products. And they didn't stop at lighting either. The lab pushed GE into massive, entirely new markets, eventually leading to things like the development of the first U.S. jet engine in 1942. They used controlled innovation to just exclude others from the market entirely.
Now, let's look at how they maintained that grip with our third pillar, collusion and market control. See, GE didn't just rely on their patents. They actively and purposefully regulated the economy through aggressive partnerships. Back in the Gilded Age, industrial collusion wasn't really a scandal. It was essentially standard operating procedure.
GE actively tamed market volatility by shaking hands with competitors to fix prices, set quotas, and block any new competition. In fact, in 1896, to avoid mutually assured destruction through endless patent litigation, GE formed a board of patent control and created a literal duopoly with its absolute biggest rival, Westinghouse.
So here is exactly how GE's highly effective collusion cycle worked in practice. Step 1. Pool the patents together with your rivals so nobody is suing anyone. Step 2. Divide up the market based on the value of the patents each company brought to the table. For instance, GE snagged about 62.5% of the heavy equipment market, while Westinghouse took the rest. Step 3. Set production quotas and fix prices across both domestic and international markets. This anti-competitive loop beautifully maintained their market dominance and, naturally, kept their profits incredibly high.
The sheer audacity of this strategy really peaked in 1911. The government actually stepped in and an antitrust decree dissolved a holding company GE was using to control the lamp market, called Nela. But GE's response? They basically said, okay, fine, and simply absorbed those assets directly into their own company. By doing this, they legally doubled their market share of incandescent lighting from roughly 40% to an astonishing 80%. They literally took a major antitrust action and spun it into a massive consolidation victory. Unbelievable, right? All right, moving on to our final strategic pillar, financing the consumer market.
GE figured out pretty early on that just manufacturing products wasn't going to be enough to truly dominate. They had to actively cultivate and control the consumption of those products too. They had to actually create their own buyers. And they pulled this off by supplying financial services at both extreme ends of the economic spectrum. In 1905, they formed the Electric Bond and Share Company. This provided capital to small, struggling utility companies so they could afford to build out local power grids that, of course, were built using GE's heavy equipment. Fast forward to 1932, and they launched the GE Credit Corporation, stepping in to give everyday families the lines of credit they needed to actually buy GE washing machines, refrigerators, and radios.
Think about the absolute brilliance of this setup. Under the leadership of executives like Gerard Swope and Owen Young in the 1920s and 30s, GE used this financialization strategy to completely lock in their customers. They financed the power plant that generated the electricity, they financed the grid that transmitted the electricity, and they financed the toaster in your kitchen that consumed the electricity. They totally dominated the new mass commercial operation of the American home because they owned the entire value chain from top to bottom.
So let's bring all of these pieces together to look at the blueprint of dominance. The true, undeniable genius of the GE playbook was simultaneous execution. The mergers created an inescapable foundation of combined AC and DC patents. Their weaponized R&D actively blocked competitors and monopolized innovation. Collusion and duopolies absolutely guaranteed price control and market stability. And finally, consumer finance locked in that entire value chain from the massive power plant right down to your living room. When you put them all together, these four pillars engineered a century of absolute industrial hegemony.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to ponder today. When we look around at our current landscape of massive tech platforms, companies that buy up their competitors, weaponize their closed ecosystems, dominate market share, and totally control the digital value chain from huge cloud servers right down to the smartphone in your pocket, we really have to ask ourselves, are today's modern monopolies just running an updated version of the 1892 GE playbook? The technology itself has certainly changed, for sure, but the underlying architecture of corporate power, that might be exactly the same. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the structures around you. See you next time.